Okay. Yeah. So there we go. All right. So this is group one, discussion 7. This is Kevin Cronin.
And Greg Allen.
And all right, let's jump right into the creative responses. So I did mine on uh, obviously the emotional development of adolescence and sort of how like they go through um, a number of changes because of the generalized concept of adolescence and how you have the neuronal changes along with the physical maturity and how they're basically coming to not only understand themselves but also understand their peers and potential authority figures and concepts of like how like they sort of start to cope with all of these changes. Um, so I basically sort of looked into how having uh, positive like role models and positive connections during that period are very important. Like so, having like a parent figure uh, and or like a mentor or a role model or something like that can have a positive influence on them just because it is a very confusing time and how that type of connection can lead to positive emotional growth as opposed to negative connections which will lead to a negative emotional growth and an inability to connect to their peers and to others. Um, and that was kind of like the general gist of it. So, I mean, I don't really know exactly like which one would be more beneficial if it would be like a parent or a mentor would be more beneficial in that or peer connections. But I suppose just like in terms of us being prospective teachers, it would sort of be our job to uh, understand and potentially help where we can with the types of emotional development that we can, I guess, in a sense, influence in a positive way.
Hmm.
And yeah, that was basically the general concept of what I kind of went into in my um, creative response.
Cool. So for mine, I did the option of interviewing somebody.
Mm.
Um, I chose to do my mom because she works for New York State Office for Prevention of Domestic Violence, and she does a lot of trainings and clinics at schools about bullying, sexual assault, and domestic violence. So I focused on the bullying aspect of that and kind of asked her questions and then compared her answers with some of the stuff that we saw in the reading. And I thought that it was pretty interesting that pretty much everything she said aligned itself with the reading, which shows that the data is pretty uh, aligned across the professional world. And my conclusion from that was kind of okay, so professionals are agreeing on what needs to be done. Now it's a matter of training the teachers and the administrators, and then actually implementing the techniques and the policies to prevent bullying going forward.
Okay, nice.
So that was pretty much the idea of mine.
All right, all right. So yeah, I guess let's transition into the first question. So the first question is based on the film and the reading, how can adults foster emotional intelligence in young people? And how can interethnic friendships be fostered?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, big part of emotional intelligence is, that it's the idea of like being aware of and in control of your own emotions, and then handling interpersonal relationships with empathy. So, treating people with empathy and treating people with respect. And I think the best way to foster this is by, setting a positive example. So, in our own lives and in front of our own kids, and, as a teacher in front of our own students, I think it's important to talk about our own feelings and treat people with respect in front of our kids and in front of our students. Um, and then, it's the idea that if your kids or students see you doing this, they'll naturally pick up on it and believe that, oh, this is the way that you're supposed to act, versus if a kid grows up um, in a home where his parents are yelling and arguing with each other all the time and are being rude to one another, or it's an abusive household, that kid is going to believe that that's the way that things should be. And, that child is probably going to have some problems going forward with bullying others. The idea of the abused becomes the abuser. So I think setting that example of empathy and respect, and showing your own emotions in a responsible and appropriate way is a really good way to kind of foster that for our kids and for younger generations. Something else that I think is important is that, starting at a young age, we hold kids accountable for their actions and, how they're expressing their emotions. So one thing I was thinking of, like the classic, families in a grocery store and a kid starts throwing a temper tantrum because his mom won't let him get a candy bar, right? So it's important to say to that kid, like, okay, that's not an appropriate way to act or express your emotions. You can't yell and scream and cry when you don't get what you want when you're in public, right? So if we start holding them accountable at a young age, they'll start to learn that, um, what's appropriate and what's not appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, like, it just reminds me of my 2-year-old nephew. I mean, he goes ballistic and just starts throwing himself on the ground
Mhm.
and things like that. So, like, yeah, I'll like put him in like a timeout, and then after a couple minutes, go like ask him what he did wrong. But he's 2, so he can't really like come up with any like real sort of sentences to explain what's going on. So he just starts randomly like just spitting out like random nonsense about things that have nothing to do with anything. Yeah, I don't know why that reminded me of that, but uh, yeah, I mean, I guess like just based on the film that I watched Boyhood. Um, so like based on that, like you sort of in the movie you had Ethan Hawke was the dad, and so him and Patricia Arquette's character uh, both kind of like have their own uh, individual ways of going about um, like sort of expanding on the their children's emotional intelligence. So you had Patricia Arquette was like in college trying to get a job that would be better suited to raising 2 children on her own. And then Ethan Hawke in the very beginning didn't really like have any kind of stable job, but he seemed more like open with his kids and stuff, and like he would explain things to them. He like in one scene he has like the sex talk with his daughter, and like that kind of like openness and ability to like have these types of grown up conversations with adolescents and people of that age kind of like, yes, it might be uncomfortable, but it does sort of teach them to sort of deal with things in an emotionally stable and adult sort of way. So that was like one thing I sort of got out of that. Um, and yeah, I mean, it kind of also ties into what I wrote about in my creative response. Just like with the idea of adults, sort of authority figures showing um, adolescents, like just a, I guess like a sort of blueprint as to how to go about living life and being ingrained in a society that um, requires sort of connection with other people, and just like going about the like the sort of ways to positively try and do that, because I think that that's a, as well as whatever subject the teachers are teaching. That's another aspect of being a teacher, is kind of helping mentor kids and giving them like a sort of early insight into how to go about being an adult and things of that nature. Um, I think that's some aspect of it. And in terms of interethnic friendships, I would say, I mean, I guess just like that's another aspect in terms of the authority figures, is like if you have authority figures who are closed minded in that sense, you're obviously not going to be open to the experience of um, friendships with people who are different than you. Whereas if you have a sort of mentor figure who teaches you to be open and uh, accept difference and not sort of like rebel against it, that's another way that you can sort of help foster that emotional intelligence and foster interethnic friendships in that way. Because I mean, it's like the idea of like diversity of thought and diversity of action and things of that nature, and that's how you sort of create a more inclusive society, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And then just going off of that a little bit, in the reading, it was saying that, having a diverse student body isn't enough. You need parents and teachers and administrators to um, encourage these relationships. And, a couple ways that the reading mentioned that you could go about this is, having collaborative projects with people from different backgrounds, having open discussion in the classroom about race and racism, both formally and informally. And then just overall having an inclusive curriculum is important. And then you need the full effort from parents, teachers, administrators, the government, and the community as a whole, to really encourage and push this idea of openness and inclusion.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So let's just go right into the next one. How can schools address bullying and cyberbullying?
Yeah, so I thought something that I thought was cool in the reading was, can't think of the name of the person, but they had like the list of 10 things that can help prevent bullying, which feeds into the whole idea that it's important to be proactive instead of reactive. So if we can eliminate the problem before it surfaces, that's the best way of going about it. Um, so, some of the things that list talked about were stop labeling kids as bullies and victims. Um, Something else was naming the behavior. So basically saying that rather than calling it bullying, saying exactly what it was. This was sexual harassment. This was a homophobic remark. Um, things of that nature. Something else that I thought was cool was when it said listen to students and get their perspective. Um, so just in general, being open to student opinions and hearing what they have to say, because this doesn't create that power imbalance. Said that a lot of times aggression stems from unequal status. So if teachers or administrators are on a platform up here where students feel like they're lower or they're, you know, slaves, for a lack of better term, then that could lead to aggression, is what it's saying. Like that imbalance of power or that feeling of being unequal could lead to aggressive behavior. So those were just a few of the ones that stood out to me.
Yeah. I mean, I liked the idea that you just mentioned about lost my train of thought there. Oh, right. Yeah. Just the prevention aspect. Like, I mean, I think that kind of ties into, yeah, like instead of being reactive, be proactive. That kind of ties into, like the sort of like mentor role that a teacher would have. Um, and like, as opposed to like reacting to the issue, be like almost sort of like a person who they would like look to instead of having to sort of figure things out on their own. I mean, because like yeah, I mean, I think if kids like that are left to their own, it almost sort of devolves into like a Lord of the Flies kind of a situation. In that sense, you almost would need like someone to look up to, because if there was no one to look up to, it kind of becomes almost very primal. And that sort of primal element, kind of like what the reading was talking about, with like almost like the social classes almost within a school, where you have like the popular kids and then like the people who are lower on that status would potentially, um, because of like their status in the school, get bullied, and like that's kind of like a weird dynamic, but it does exist. So I mean, yeah, that just kind of ties back into that prevention aspect. And also, yeah, I mean, it just like, I feel like it all ties into the emotional intelligence aspect, because it's like an adolescent that develops that way properly would, see that as being like a kind of weird behavior to want to put someone else down, or injure someone either mentally or physically. And yeah, so that's just kind of something that like I would imagine a parent or a mentor would, or a positive parent or mentor would be able to sort of like the adolescent would be able to look up to that person and be like, this is what I kind of want to be like. I don't want to be a bully kind of an aspect.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like cyberbullying might be a little more difficult just because it's all online, and it's kind of potentially more difficult to sort of recognize, because it is like uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Anonymous. There it is. Um, but yeah, I mean, the same thing kind of ties into it. It's just like you have to almost sort of teach kids to be aware of what they're doing and the potential mental and emotional side effects that these actions are going to have on the people that they are directing them towards.
Right. So, while we're talking about bullying, we could bring up one of my questions, which was, how do you think bullying has changed over the years?
Yeah, I mean, like in Boyhood, there's a scene where the main uh boy is sort of bullied in like the bathroom. And I think that that's kind of like the stereotypical sort of almost definition of it. Like where you see like a movie and there's like a kid in the bathroom as the other kid comes in, he like pushes him into a stall or something and is like calling him names or her names and things of that nature. That's sort of like I guess how it was, but now with the information age that we're in, it has sort of transferred into the social media sphere, where a person can do something like that anonymously, um, with little to no repercussions. Um, I guess in that sense, that's probably one way that it's changed. I also think that the preventative measures have also changed. Like, whereas like 20, 30 years ago, it was just like the authority figures might have just said something to the effect of oh, it'll toughen him up or something,
Right.
whereas now it's like we have a better sort of understanding on the state of mental health and the potential problems that that would cause. So I think that's potential aspects of how it's changed over the years.
Yeah. And, just going on top of that, I would say that, I think that physical bullying has declined. Um, like the old tale of like somebody getting shoved into a locker or, just getting punched in the face just because, like, I think that has gone down, but I don't think that means that it's gotten better. Um, you know, there's still verbally a ton of ways that you can bully someone and pick on somebody. So I think, obviously, like you said, the social media has brought in a whole new aspect of bullying. But I think this transition from, physical bullying, where, you could point to something real and say, look, I got punched in the face, I'm being bullied, or a teacher walks by and sees a kid shoved into a locker. Okay, that kid is being bullied. Now it's almost harder to pinpoint because you can't be there for every conversation. In the lunchroom or on the bus, you know, it could look like kids are just talking or, joking around with one another, but really somebody could be getting, you know, seriously picked on or made fun of, which could cause some effects going forward.
Yeah, and that would also be like almost intraceable because you can't really see what's going on in a person's head based on the
Exactly.
that somebody else said to them.
Right. There's no physical evidence of it.
Yeah, yep.
All right. So I guess I'll just ask my other question too, uh, which is, what is your personal experience um, with friendships? And going off of that, how were they fostered? And did you have interethnic friendships, and why or why not?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like most of my friendships sort of came out of school or work experiences. Um, and I mean, I guess just based off of that, like like I mean, the camaraderie that a person has with someone that they're working with, especially at a place like Sears or something like that, where I worked for a couple of years. Um, it sort of grows out of the shared resentment of said job. I would guess. Yeah, and I guess in terms of interethnic friendships, most of those kind of came out of the work environment, like at Sears. I had number of African American friends who I worked with in the back. Like we worked in like the backstock room, basically lugging around heavy machinery and things of that nature. um, and additionally, I would like I lived next to them, so I would drive them to and from work. Um, so I would suppose that that was one element of it. Um, and I mean, additionally, it's just like I was saying earlier, it's the diversity of thought and diversity of ideas and things of that nature. Like they thought about the world in a different way than I did, and I thought about the world in a different way than they did. And I think um, both sides of that sort of understood that it was a potential benefit for both sides. Like, I mean, like I gained ideas and knowledge about the world and how they lived, and they gained knowledge and ideas about the way that I lived, and potentially they incorporated ideas that I gave them, and I incorporated ideas that they gave me. Um, and I think that that is a more inclusive way of living because you sort of can see things from different perspectives as opposed to just being sort of having sort of mono perspective on the world. I mean, the world is constantly changing and it's constantly in flux, so having a sort of closed-minded view of it is uh, sort of negative uh, for a person that looks at the world that way. Um, Additionally, it kind of closes you off to understanding what another person might be experiencing and things like that. So I would say in that aspect, those relationships definitely helped me. Um, Not sure about what it did for them, but yeah.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, in general, I would say, I've always had a lot of friends, and I think that's greatly because my parents encouraged friendships, and my parents allowed me to do things and have friends over for dinner or have friends over for sleepovers. So I think like the overall encouragement of go do things, go have friends, go see people that um, meet at school. Um, that was always encouraged by my parents. So I think that's kind of how they fostered my friendships. Um, and then as far as interethnic friendships, I never really had a ton of friends of color or friends from different backgrounds. And I think it's largely just because of what I was exposed to. I went to a high school that was mostly white. I played um, a sport in golf, which is played by mostly white people. I went to a college that was 85% white. Um, so, in general, there wasn't a ton of exposure. But the friends that I do have who are from different ethnicities, those friendships were typically made by something that we had in common. Um, so I played basketball growing up, so I made some interethnic friendships through playing basketball. Um, I'm into rap and hip hop music. Um, so I've met friends from different backgrounds through that common interest. Um, so I do have a few interethnic friendships, but overall, my exposure to people from different backgrounds has not been, um, I haven't been fully immersed in different cultures. However, at the college that I went to, um, there was an emphasis on, uh, acceptance and being open-minded, and a lot of the classes were tailored towards learning about different cultures. So, even though I wasn't directly exposed, I feel that through my parents and through my education, uh, I have a certain amount of openness and acceptance for other cultures and people from different backgrounds.
Very nice. All right, so let's see here. So I guess we'll just jump right into my first question, which is, what type of impact has a parent or teacher had on your emotional development as a youth?
Yeah, so I think both of my parents have always told me that it's okay to express my emotions and tell them how I feel. And my dad has been a good example for me, of saying like, um, there's the idea or this uh, thought that men can't cry or men have to be tough. My dad did a pretty good job of knocking that idea down. He always told me that it's okay to have emotions. It's okay to, feel weak sometimes, but it's important to express your emotions and tell people how you're feeling about situations. So I would say that's really helped me, um, you know, keep control of my emotions, and I don't get angry too often. Um, I do, sometimes feel sad or upset, and I feel like that's okay. And I feel like it's okay to express that emotion because of how my parents raised me.
Very nice. Yeah, I mean, I guess on the same sort of element there, my parents have been very accepting and open with various sort of like emotional turmoil that me or any of my siblings have had. Um, Additionally, I mean, the same with like certain teachers, because I mean, like I have one teacher now actually for a Shakespeare class who uh, in a similar vein to what you were just saying about the sort of concept of like men not being able to show emotions and things of that nature. He consistently quotes Macbeth, um, not actually Macbeth, but Macduff. Um, and the quote is something to the effect of like it's right after his wife and his children have been murdered by Macbeth, and somebody says you have to revenge it like a man, and Macduff says, "But first I must feel it like a man." And then he just starts crying. Um, I mean, which is acceptable because his wife and daughter, or his wife and kids, were just murdered. But yeah, I mean, I sort of think that um, parents and mentor figures have a very large influence over a person's emotional development in that way. Because I mean, it's like you said, you get um, parents who don't want to deal with their kids' sort of emotions and things of that nature, and they basically have them suppress or repress those emotions, which in terms of like psychology and things of that nature is usually never a good thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I would say I had a pretty similar experience to you in that sense. Yeah, so yeah, so I guess my last question is, how can interethnic friendships potentially give adolescents a better view of the world?
Yeah, so I think just being exposed to as many different cultures as possible teaches you a bunch of different things. You can learn about different religions and different cultures and different rituals and I know like one of my friends is Jewish, so just being around the family, I've seen different things. I've eaten different foods. I've seen some traditions that they go through around the holidays, and without having her as a friend, I never would have been exposed to that religion and that what so many people go through, um, and consider a big part of their life. So I think just the idea of seeing and being immersed in something that's different from what you do every day, um, can really teach you a lot, and have you keep an open mind about everyone and every culture.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's similar to what I was going to say. I mean, I've sort of reiterated the point several times about the diversity of ideas and the diversity of lifestyles and things of that nature. Um, but yeah, I think that that is beneficial to everyone involved. I mean, like uh, like I've sort of already said, if you have a sort of monochromatic view of the world, it's not exactly going to be beneficial for you if you experience a situation that you are unaccustomed to. Um, excuse me. And yeah, having a deeper sort of outlook on the world is going to help you sort of comprehend situations better. And I think that, especially at a time like the adolescence period, when you are going through all of these changes and um, connections are being made and other connections are being pruned off, it seems like that would be a sort of neuronal connection that you would want to hold on to, is the ability to understand others, especially in today's society where it seems like no one even attempts to understand each other. Um, and that is going to, I think, in a sense, make the world a better place. Um, to be overly optimistic, but yeah, I mean, I think just yeah, I mean, even if you have differing opinions and potentially different political views, the ability to be able to attempt at the very least to understand what the other side is saying, and understand what other people are trying to do and say, um, gives you like almost a leg up in the world, because you're not um, you're not a an ignorant person in that sense, and that's I think that's sort of what we need more of.
Yeah, it's almost like the more you see and the more you're exposed to, the more and the more the greater opportunity for learning.
Hmm. Absolutely.
So,
All right.
all right, does that wrap us up?
I would say it does.
All right, sounds good.
Sweet deal. Signing off.